The ranch sat far beyond the last fence line where the land turned quiet and the wind spoke louder than people. Ethan Cole lived there alone, a man shaped by dust, hard work, and long silences. Every morning he rose before the sun fed his horses, checked the well, and stared at the horizon as if waiting for something he could not name. People in town said he chose loneliness, but the truth was simpler life had taken from him before he learned how to ask for more. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, Ethan noticed movement near the old cottonwood tree. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal, but then he heard a voice trembling soft but strong. When he walked closer, he saw a woman standing barefoot at the edge of his land, her dress torn by thorns, her eyes fierce with fear and pride. She lifted her hand and said, "Do not come closer. Close your eyes, this place is off limits." Her words were strange, but her voice carried a command that made Ethan stop without knowing why. He turned his head, slightly respecting her boundary, even though confusion pulled at him. She said her name was Clara, and she had walked for days, escaping a life that had tried to own her. She did not explain more, only that she needed water, rest, and a promise that he would not look at her like something to be taken. Ethan nodded and poured water into a tin cup, setting on the ground before stepping back. That moment something shifted in him. Not desire, not pity, but respect. It had been years since anyone spoke to him with honesty instead of fear or expectation. As the sun fell, Clara sat beneath the cottonwood and spoke about the road behind her. She talked of mistakes and courage and the quiet strength it takes to say no when the world pushes too hard. Ethan listened without interrupting, learning her story not through details but through emotion. When night came, he offered her the guest cabin near the creek. He stayed outside by the fire, giving her space and safety without being asked. The stars overhead watched as two broken paths crossed without force. Days passed and Clara remained. She helped in the garden, mended clothes, and laughed in a way that startled birds from the fence posts. Ethan found himself smiling without realizing it. One morning she stood beside him watching the sunrise and said, "You did not cross my line when you could have." That told me more than words ever could. Ethan answered quietly that some things are sacred when left untouched. Clara looked at him, then not with fear, but with curiosity. They did not speak of love. They spoke of trust, of healing, of building something slowly like the way land learns to bloom again after fire. Ethan realized that companionship did not arrive with noise or drama. Sometimes it came softly, asking you to close your eyes and respect what could not yet be seen. And in that silence, a future began to breathe. Morning came slowly across the ranch, spreading light like a promise kept in secret. Ethan woke before dawn as always, but something felt different. The silence no longer pressed on his chest. It listened. Clara stepped out of the cabin, wrapped in an old shawl. She paused when she saw him, as if unsure whether the peace would remain. Ethan only nodded and handed her a cup of warm water. No words were needed. They worked side by side that day, fixing a loose fence, clearing stones from the field, tending to the horses. Their movements found a rhythm that felt natural, like the land itself had been waiting for two sets of footsteps instead of one. Clara spoke more as the hours passed, not rushing, not explaining everything, just sharing what felt safe. She spoke of a childhood filled with rules that felt like cages, of a voice she once lost because no one listened, of the moment she decided to walk away even though the road ahead terrified her. Ethan listened the way dry ground listens to rain, without judgment, without hurry. He did not try to solve her pain. He simply made space for it. That evening a storm rolled in from the west. Thunder echoed across the plains and rain struck the earth hard and fast. Clara flinched at the sound. Her hands trembled as memories surfaced. Ethan did not touch her. He stood close enough that she knew she was not alone. He said nothing, but his presence spoke clearly. "You are safe here." They waited out the storm together, inside the cabin. The rain softened. The wind calmed. And with it something inside, Clara loosened. She looked at Ethan and said, "I am not used to men who stop when asked. I am not used to silence that does not demand something." Ethan answered, "I learned long ago that forcing anything only breaks it. Land, people, trust." That night, Clara slept deeply for the first time in months. Ethan sat outside watching the stars, feeling a quiet gratitude he could not name. In the days that followed, she became part of the ranch, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as a presence that belonged. She found joy in small tasks, hanging laundry in the sun, cooking simple meals, humming songs without words. Ethan noticed how the animals responded to her. The horses grew calm. The birds lingered longer. Even the wind seemed gentler. One afternoon, Clara stood by the creek, staring at her reflection. She said softly, "I am afraid that if I stay, I will forget how to leave. And if I leave, I will lose who I am becoming." Ethan took a long breath. He said, "You do not owe this place anything. Staying should be a choice, not a shelter from fear." She looked at him, searching for a hidden meaning. Finding none, only truth. That was when Clara realized something important. Ethan was not holding her. He was not saving her. He was simply walking beside her. As the sun set that evening, Clara made a quiet decision, not spoken, not announced, but felt. For the first time, she was not running. And for the first time, Ethan was not waiting. Two lives bruised by the past were learning a new language, one made of patience, boundaries, and the courage to let something grow without naming it too soon. The ranch stood witness, and the land listened, and slowly something stronger than loneliness began to take root. The weeks unfolded gently like pages turned by the wind. Clara no longer counted days by fear, but by sunlight and work completed. She woke with purpose and slept with peace, something she had not known before. Ethan noticed a change not just in her, but in himself. He spoke more often, laughed sometimes, even hummed while fixing tools in the barn. The ranch that once felt like a place to survive now felt like a place to live. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the distant road. Dust rose behind the horse like a warning. Clara saw it first, and her body stiffened. Her past had a way of finding her when she least expected it. Ethan watched her face and understood without words. He asked quietly, "Do you want me to send them away?" Clara swallowed hard, then nodded yes, but do not confront them alone. Ethan rode out to the fence line, calm and steady. The rider was a man from town, someone who claimed to be looking for a runaway woman. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply said, "No one here belongs to anyone else, and you will turn back." There was something in his stillness that ended the conversation. The rider left. Clara watched from the cabin, heart racing. When Ethan returned, she said, "Thank you not for protecting me, but for asking first." That night, she told him more, about a marriage arranged by fear, about being told her silence was obedience, about the day she realized that survival without dignity was not living. Ethan listened to fire crackling between them. He said, "I was married once, not in papers, but in promises. I lost her to illness, and after that I thought my heart had closed for good." They sat with that truth, letting it rest between them. No need to compare pain. No need to fix it. The next morning, Clara suggested expanding the garden. Ethan smiled at the idea of planting for a future that assumed time. They worked the soil together, hands, dirty backs, aching laughter breaking the quiet. As days passed, boundaries shifted naturally. Not erased, respected. Clara no longer needed to warn him to close his eyes. Trust had taken its place. One evening as they walked back from the fields, Clara reached for his hand. Not quickly, not hesitantly, just honestly. Ethan felt the weight of that moment. He did not pull her closer. He simply held on. The ranch changed with the seasons. Green gave way to gold. The creek ran lower. The air grew crisp. With every shift, their bond deepened not through grand gestures but daily choices. Clara began teaching children in town how to read and write. Ethan watched her confidence bloom. She was no longer hiding. She was becoming. One night, under a sky full of stars, Clara said something that surprised them both. She said, "I think this place did not save me. I saved myself. This place just gave me room." Ethan nodded. He said, "And you gave this place a heart again." They did not speak of marriage, but they spoke of tomorrow, of repairing the roof before winter, of planting fruit trees, of sharing responsibilities. Love arrived quietly, not as a storm, but as a steady light that did not blind. Ethan realized that respect had been the foundation all along. When he closed his eyes at the beginning, he had opened a future he never imagined. And Clara understood that being seen did not mean being taken. It meant being chosen freely. As the wind moved through the grass and the night settled in, two lives once guarded by walls stood open, not because they were fearless, but because they were safe. And the ranch no longer stood as a refuge from a world. It stood as a home shaped by patience, trust, and the courage to begin again. Winter arrived without warning, laying frost across the ranch like a quiet test. The mornings were colder, the nights longer, and the work heavier. Yet neither Ethan nor Clara complained. They met each day with the same steady resolve they had built together. Clara learned the rhythms of winter life, how to store food, how to mend what could not be replaced, how to listen to the land when it rested. Ethan watched her move through the season with calm strength and felt a pride he never tried to hide. One night, a harsh storm tore through the valley. Snow piled high, and the wind howled like something alive. The old roof of the main house gave way under the weight. Ethan was injured when a beam fell, striking his shoulder hard. Clara acted without panic. She bound his arm, kept him warm, and stayed awake through the night, watching his breath. The fear of losing him shook her, but she did not run from it. When morning came and the storm passed, Ethan tried to rise. Clara stopped him firmly and said, "Now you rest. This is my turn." For weeks, Ethan was forced to slow down, something he had avoided for years. Clara managed a ranch with careful determination. She fed the animals, repaired what she could, and sought help from town when needed. People noticed. They saw her confidence, her fairness, her refusal to be owned by pity. They began to respect her not as a guest, but as a partner in the land. Ethan watched from the porch, realizing something important. Strength was not in standing alone. It was in trusting someone else to carry the weight. As his injury healed, so did something inside him. The fear that loving again meant losing everything. Clara had already proven she would not disappear when things became hard. One evening, as the snow melted and the first signs of spring appeared, Ethan spoke words he had never planned. He said, "I do not want to live a life where you feel temporary." Clara looked at him steady and clear. She said, "I do not want to belong to someone, but I do want to belong with someone." Their understanding deepened, not sealed by vows, but by choice renewed every day. They began rebuilding the damaged parts of the house together. Each beam lifted carried meaning. Each nail driven marked commitment without ownership. Children from town visited more often, learning stories, reading books, helping in the garden. The ranch became a place of gathering, not isolation. Clara realized she was no longer afraid of being seen. Her voice was strong and her past no longer defined her future. Ethan realized he no longer feared the quiet, because it was filled with shared breaths, shared purpose, shared dreams. One morning, Clara stood at the doorway and said, "Close your eyes." Ethan smiled and did as she asked. When he opened them, she stood there confident, unafraid, fully present. She said, "This time it is not off limits. This time I choose to be seen." The moment was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had survived. As spring settled in and the land began to bloom again, Ethan understood that love had not arrived through possession or rescue. It had arrived through patience, trust, and the courage to let another person remain whole. And Clara knew that the freedom she fought for had not been compromised. It had been honored. Together, they stood not as savior and saved, not as owner and belonging, but as equals facing the future side by side. The ranch breathed again, and so did they. Spring turned the ranch green again, and life moved with a gentle urgency. Seeds they had planted together pushed through the soil. Each sprout felt like proof that patience could become something real. Clara took on a larger role in the nearby town. She organized lessons for children and helped women who arrived with the same fear she once carried. She never told her full story. She did not need to. Her presence alone gave others courage. Ethan watched her from a distance with quiet admiration. He never interrupted her path. He simply adjusted his own steps to walk alongside her. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It carried Clara's name written in a hand she recognized too well. Her past had not forgotten her. She held the letter for hours before opening it. Ethan did not ask what it said. He waited until she chose to speak. When she finally did, her voice was calm. She said, "They want me to return. They promise forgiveness if I accept the life I left behind." Ethan felt anger rise, but he kept it contained. He said, "What do you want?" Clara looked toward the open land. She said, "I want a life where I do not shrink, where my voice does not need permission." Ethan nodded. "Then whatever you choose, I will not stand in your way." That night, Clara did not sleep. She walked the fields thinking of the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the road she might still have to walk. At sunrise, she made her decision. She would answer the letter, not with fear, not with apology, but with truth. She wrote that she was safe. She was whole, and she would not return to a place that asked her to disappear. Sending the letter felt like closing a door gently but firmly. No anger, no regret. After that, Clara felt lighter, as if something that had been following her finally stopped. Ethan noticed a change. He said, "You look like someone who has chosen herself." She smiled. "I have." They began talking openly about the future, not as a dream, but as a plan. Expanding the land, building a larger schoolroom, opening their home to those in need. Still neither spoke the word marriage, not because it frightened them, but because they wanted it to mean something chosen, not assumed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink low, Ethan spoke carefully. He said, "I once thought a wife was someone who filled a space. I was wrong. She is someone who stands fully in her own space and lets you stand beside her." Clara listened, her eyes bright. She said, "I never wanted to be rescued. I wanted to be respected." They understood then that what they had built was already a partnership, defined not by title but by action. The town slowly began to see them as one unit, not because they claimed it, but because they lived it. Children ran freely on the ranch. Laughter replaced echoes. The land responded to care and attention. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Clara said softly, "Do you know what scares me now?" Ethan asked what. She said, "Losing this. Not because it is fragile, but because it is real." Ethan took her hand, steady and warm. He said, "Real things are worth the risk." They sat together in silence, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring, knowing they would meet it honestly. The ranch no longer marked the end of the road. It marked the beginning of a shared journey, and somewhere between letters answered and futures chosen. They both knew a promise was forming, not spoken yet, but already alive. Summer arrived full and bright, wrapping the ranch in warmth and open skies. The land stood strong, the house, repaired, the garden thriving. Everything carried the quiet mark of two people who had chosen to stay. Clara moved through the days with ease, no longer watching for shadows, no longer measuring her words. She belonged to herself, and that made all the difference. Ethan felt it too, the absence of loneliness, the presence of purpose. He no longer counted years by survival, but by moments shared. One morning, as they worked near the creek, Clara stopped and looked at him. She said, "When I first came here, I asked you to close your eyes. Do you remember?" Ethan smiled. "I remember choosing to listen." She nodded. "That choice gave me back my life." They walked together toward the house where children waited for lessons and neighbors gathered for a shared meal. The ranch had become more than land. It had become a promise that people could begin again. As the day faded, Ethan asked Clara to walk with him to the cottonwood tree where they first met. The leaves whispered in the wind. The ground felt sacred with memory. He did not kneel. He did not perform. He simply stood facing her and spoke from a place without fear. He said, "I will never own you. I will never silence you. But if you choose to walk with me for the rest of our days, I will choose you every morning." Clara felt tears rise, but she did not turn away. She said, "I do not need a cage or a crown. I need a partner. If you promise to see me and let me see you, then yes." There were no rings that day, no witnesses except the land and the sky. But something deeper than ceremony settled between them. From that moment on, people spoke of Clara as Ethan's wife, not because a paper declared it, but because their lives were woven together in every visible way. They built a larger house, open and welcoming. They taught together, worked together, dreamed together. No lines crossed, no eyes closed in fear. Years passed, and stories spread of a ranch where respect ruled, where a woman found her voice, and a man learned that love begins with listening. On quiet evenings, Clara would sometimes smile and say, "Close your eyes." And Ethan would do it without hesitation. Trust fully earned. When he opened them, she would be standing there exactly as she was. Whole, seen, free. The lesson of their life together was simple. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. And love is the courage to wait until you are invited inside. The ranch stood as proof that the strongest bonds are built not by force, but by patience, not by taking, but by choosing. And so the story did not end with a wedding or a claim. It continued every day in small, faithful ways. Two lives once shaped by loss, now shaped by respect, walking forward together, eyes open, heart steady, and a future chosen freely.